Hi everybody, I am here with Matt Foreman and I want to talk today a bit about something that I've seen come up in triathlon. So most recently I've seen that USAT and USA Weightlifting have partnered, and they are combining to teach coaches how to incorporate Olympic lifting into triathlon programs and endurance sports. And I thought it would be a great opportunity for myself as a 20-year endurance athlete and coach in triathlon and endurance sports, and having Matt Foreman, who is a lifetime 30-year veteran of Olympic lifting and strength sports, to give some of our insight and thoughts and help you maybe navigate through what some of the pitfalls might be and some things to look for. We're not going to be able to cover everything today. It's just such a huge topic. You know, it's something we could talk about for hours, but hopefully today we can start to touch on some of these ideas and topics and help you navigate this as it becomes something more available to us as endurance athletes. I'm I had a long professional career in triathlon, and you can see everything about me and my coaching and my results as an athlete on my website at mcc.coach. And so if you're curious about that, and then, we've got Matt here. Tell us a little bit. He's got such a long history in Olympic lifting, but also developing programs on how to coach Olympic lifting, and also actually teaching a lot of the courses for USA Weightlifting. So, we've got a good opportunity here to talk about this stuff. So,
Yeah. I've taught weightlifting to almost every demographic of people you can possibly think of. I was a strength and conditioning coach at the college level for a few years back in the 90s. There, my job was to teach weightlifting movements, Olympic lifting, and all other kinds of strength movements to athletes from every sport, from football to volleyball to swimming to basketball to cross country to everything. Over the years, I've also probably taught more, weightlifting instruction seminars than I can definitely more than I can even count or think of, through a wide range of areas. I've done a lot of coaching and teaching seminars through private sector companies like Iron Athlete. I'm also on the coaching education staff for USA Weightlifting, so I teach weightlifting to all the people who want to get involved with the sport and learn about it. I would say the largest percentage of people that I've taught weightlifting to are people who want to be, serious Olympic weightlifters and competitive weightlifters. But I've also taught the sport to a very large number of people who want to use weightlifting to basically get better at another sport or get better at something else, whether it be CrossFit, endurance sport, football, whatever. I've taught the Olympic lifts to just about everybody, so I've seen what it's like to teach the sport to people who really want to get better at it, and also people who just want to learn it so they can incorporate it into something else.
Yeah, and so that's and the other unique insight that we both have is that being an endurance athlete, I went ahead and got involved in Olympic lifting myself for a few years, and did that as my primary sport when I retired from racing professionally. So got to dabble a little bit in that world as what we call a amateur full-time lifter, and then came back to endurance sport and got to play around with, hey, is there a place for this in terms of continuing to Olympic lift while I get back into endurance sports? And you have the insight of coaching a few triathletes and cyclists that have come through your gym. Obviously, you still have a full-time program where you coach Olympic lifters actively on the national scene, even international, and some big competitions. And so you've seen what it's like to coach specifically a triathlete or cyclist in the Olympic lift. So this is, we've got a good opportunity to share some of our insights on this. The main thing that I want to cover today is I want to give my insight of what I feel for an endurance athlete, and what I felt myself personally when I did the Olympic lifts, what benefits there were, and then what pitfalls that I found as I tried to continue to incorporate them as an endurance athlete, and how you can navigate to do that well. But mostly I want to pick Matt's brain here on really specific things like what exercises, sets, and reps, and what should someone who's going to be learning the Olympic lifts and coaching an endurance athlete through, what's going to be the most beneficial, and also what could be potentially the most harmful and need to stay away from. Because ultimately, if you're an endurance athlete and you're doing any kind of strength training at all, it needs to translate into better swim, bike, and run, or bike or run, or whatever your given endurance sport is. In this case, we'll talk triathlon, so swim, bike, and run. So if it is not making you a faster swim, bike, and runner, you have to ask yourself the question, why are you doing this? So that has to be first, primarily the thing that you're asking yourself. If I'm going to lift weights in any capacity, whether it be a core routine right up to, more, there's all different sorts of ways that you can strength train. But specifically in the Olympic lifts, you have to ask yourself, is this going to make me a better swim, bike, and runner? And so, with the Olympic lifts, first of all, we need to address the fact that it is a open chain exercise. It's also a very high impact sport. So there's, the fundamentals of Olympic lifting, there's a huge jumping component. So there's that versus the closed chain type strength strength movements, different types of squats, deadlifts, push, pull, those types of things. And so I'm sort of going a couple different directions here. Is number one, what exercises would benefit a triathlete in particular, and what exercises and sets and reps would make a better triathlete, and what would be the things to watch for to make sure that a triathlete either is not going to run into a situation where they're not benefiting, or even further, maybe possibly going to get hurt doing these kinds of things. So, and these are all conversations we've had. So I'd like you to share that with people.
Yeah, sure. There's a lot there, obviously.
Yeah, big question.
Now, first of all, strength training helping triathletes, strength training helping endurance athletes. Do I think that strength training, weightlifting training, just basic weight movement training has the potential to help endurance athletes? I think there's definitely the potential there for sure, yeah. Do I think it's a 2 + 2 = 4 equation? Like if you take somebody who's an Ironman triathlete and you incorporate weightlifting, some kind of strength training into their routine, that's automatically going to make them better? No, I don't think that's the case. I think there's, I think there's a lot of individual variation that's going to go on there.
And address also, Matt, the reason I'm just stopping you very briefly here is not just Ironman triathletes, but with USAT, it's focused primarily on short course and draft legal racing and some of the shorter, faster races. So let's make sure we cover the whole gamut of everything from Ironman being very long, a long endurance event, but also these short course fast speedsters. And if there's if there's something that applies there.
Yeah. I think most endurance athletes, well, first of all, I think most endurance athletes are probably going to have minimal to no experience in the weight room. Some variation there, obviously, but I think if you look at most endurance athletes, their weight room experience is probably going to be pretty small. So I think the biggest thing that would need to happen, especially in the beginning, is endurance athletes would just need to learn the absolute basic fundamental strength training movements, just things like how to pull a barbell from the floor, like a deadlift type of movement, how to press a barbell overhead, how to put a barbell on their back and do a squat with it, and obviously also all kinds of non-barbell related exercise, dumbbell exercises, machines, things like that, body weight exercises.
Now,
those are
again, to one of the things that we've noticed when you talk about those foundations and fundamentals is with endurance athletes, and as coaches start teaching these endurance athletes, we've noticed there is an element of some of these athletes literally can't get into those positions because of mobility issues, or some of the things that make them great runners or great cyclists in lack of range of motion, whether it be tight ankles or tight hips, which benefit them actually in cycling or running, is going to present a problem for the coaches trying to teach them to get into good positions for this. So when we talk about these fundamentals of just learning to pull the barbell off the ground, learning to press, those kinds of things, we need to look at these basic fundamentals right from the start from a coach's perspective, teaching these new athletes from another sport, these movements. So
Yeah. Teaching those basic fundamental strength movements to endurance athletes, it's going to be a real mixed bag in terms of what you're going to get in terms of results from the athletes. You know, when you were an Ironman triathlete and really successful professional and everything, and then you converted over and became an actual like competitive Olympic weightlifter. You had a lot of success in weightlifting. You were able to learn the positions, you were able to learn the movements, you were explosive and snappy and everything like that. But you're definitely a bit of an exception to the rule in terms of what I've seen in the past with working with people who come from endurance sport backgrounds and trying to learn barbell movements. Because if you have an endurance athlete you're going to see a lot of the basic things here. You're going to see kind of some standard things. You're going to see tightness in the hips, tightness in the back, tightness in the hamstrings, tightness in the shoulders. You're going to see a position where having that athlete just get into a lot of the basic fundamental squatting or deadlifting barbell type positions that we're talking about, those might be challenging to the point of they're not going to happen, depending on just how tight the athlete is. And keep in mind, because this conversation is kind of about like the Olympic lifts, working with endurance athletes. The movements I just talked about, basic squatting, deadlifting, pressing type movements, those are the absolute bottom line, bottom level fundamental strength movements. Once you start talking about the Olympic lifts, which means you're talking about the snatch and the clean and jerk, those are generally considered the most advanced barbell movements there are out there. They're the most dependent on flexibility. They're the most dependent on explosiveness. They're very quick, snap, boom, pow kind of movements. Deep flexion at the knee, deep flexion at the hip, extreme shoulder mobility. Those things are just prerequisites for even performing the movements with a barbell. I mean, forget about being good at them. Those things have to be there just to be able to execute the movements. So if you've got an athlete that's too inflexible to do a squat or a deadlift, trying to get them to do snatches and clean and jerks, that's going to be rough.
So one of the potential positives for any basic triathlete, if you're a coach who's going to teach triathletes the Olympic lifts, it might just be that their biggest benefit to doing any of these movements is just the gain in mobility and flexibility. And that might mean they're learning the movements with just a PVC pipe and no weight at all, but they're learning the positions, learning to contract certain muscle groups in certain positions, and the benefit of being able to get into those positions are going to create bigger ranges of motion. And you as a coach needs to decide, is that a range of motion that's going to help the athlete in their sport, or is this something that could potentially hurt their sport and we don't need that range of motion? So that could be something that as you're coaching these athletes through the Olympic lifts and you're starting at the fundamentals, teaching them those positions, this is sort of where we call ground zero, where we would start.
Yeah, and I mean, there's definitely the potential for just some of that type of movement and flexibility to help an athlete. I had a conversation once with an Ironman triathlete, age grouper guy in his 50s, very successful. And he mentioned how, throughout a lot of his training and racing, he had a lot of tightness and pain and stiffness in his lower back, hips, knees, things like that. And he told me that at one point he had discovered somewhere along in his training that if he started his workouts before he would go out to swim or bike or run or whatever, if he would do a few, and I don't even want to call them reps, just a few deep squats, just not barbell, not strength training movements, just deep knee bend, calisthenic type movements, just 2 or 3 of them, just to kind of stretch out his lumbar region, stretch out his hips. Just that flexibility movement made him feel better when he trained. So I absolutely think there's something to be gained from using strength training movements almost more as flexibility developers, because obviously if you're talking about endurance athletes and triathletes, they're not looking to gain a lot of muscle and increase mass and size because then they got to drag all that muscle mass around a race course, which is not what they're looking to do. But maybe using strength training movements as ways to just kind of break past some of those stiffness obstacles that are holding them back, some benefit there.
Yeah. Now, if you were going to say to a new coach learning to teach athletes these Olympic lifts, and say you've got an athlete that's, you know, they've got good mobility, they're pretty, say you're working with one of the NCAA, you know, teams, or some of the younger ITU athletes, they're very athletic, they're very snappy, they've got good range of motion, they're able to actually do these lifts, they're able to do things like power clean, squats, perhaps even some snatches, those types of things. Would you recommend us, like, what would the programming look like that you think would, number one, at what time of year in relationship to their events would you take that into account? And then what would that look like in terms of programming for those types of athletes? So we know, I've seen you write on the board, you know, programming, and you've got lots of great books on catalystathletics.com on how to do very specific programming for Olympic lifters. But programming for an Olympic lifter, if a triathlete just takes those, you know, those programs and tries to do them along with their swim, bike, and run, maybe that's going to be too much load, too many sets and reps, and we're going to see where that's too much overall work with swim, bike, run, and lifting for them to, you know, not run into injury, or maybe a bit of, that's just too much work overall. So what would that programming look like, and what would it look like in relationship to their race season?
Yeah, I think so. If you're looking for a weightlifting program, you're looking for something on paper that says, like, you know, what days of the week, how many sets, reps, and everything. When you go on the internet and you look up weightlifting programs, the one thing you've got to keep in mind is almost every program you see, you're going to have a situation where that workout program is all that athlete is doing, because that workout program is going to be designed for somebody who's a competitive Olympic lifter, or, you know, a strength athlete or some other way. But when you take somebody who's already putting in lots and lots of hours and miles of swim, bike, and run, and then you say, well, in addition to all that time and all that physical exertion and all that work, we're also going to throw in a weightlifting program. I mean, like a real weightlifting program on top of that. I'd pretty much be dicey about how I think that would going to
So
how that would work.
Yeah, so the advice there is, don't just grab one off the internet that is specifically geared to just a pure Olympic lifter. So what would it look like? So first of all, number of days per week.
2 or 3 at the most.
2 or 3 at the most.
And one, with 1 or 2 being absolutely an option.
Right. Yeah. And so how far out
and not during heavy race season.
Okay, so far out from race season, would you say you need to stop 8 weeks before, 3 weeks before, 2 weeks before, 12 weeks before?
I'd say it would depend on the athlete. You know, obviously, you know, you and I have talked about this. When you were training for Ironman Texas just 2 years ago, you were keeping some strength training going in your program almost all the way up until the race. And you obviously had good results. You had a great race and a great finish and a great comeback and everything. However, that doesn't mean everybody's gonna get those same results.
Let's talk in terms of a team. Like, say you've got a young NCAA team. When would you stop that strength training out from their competitive season?
I would stop the strength training when their swim, bike, and run training really started to elevate. Okay. And if that means right at the beginning of race season or a month before race season starts, then that's what it means. I wouldn't, because I mean, the only reason, if you're an endurance athlete and you're doing these lifts, the only reason you're doing them is to make you better at swimming, biking, and running. Right. So if you find yourself in a position where your swim, bike, and run training is being diminished through fatigue, soreness, or whatever that can be traced back to the weight room, you're not accomplishing anything. Right. You're doing the exact opposite of what you wanted to do.
So basically, when the base season ends and you start getting into a focused race season, that period should become the end period.
Yeah, I would think so.
And so, okay, we don't want to grab a program right off the internet because the sets, reps, and load will probably be too much for an endurance athlete. 2 questions here to go forward with this is, what exercises specifically? So we talked about fundamentals. We've established, okay, we've got the fundamentals. We've got some athletes that can do the basic movements. So what would those exercises? What would the exercises be? Say you had to write a workout on the board for a group of athletes that are a young team that can do this. What exercises would it be, and what would those sets and reps look like? Let's say a basic. We'll say we're going to lift on Tuesday and Thursday, and what would
Yeah.
that look like?
For a lot of the basic strength movements like squats, presses, deadlifts, and things like that, I would say like a 3 sets of 10 reps, maybe 3 sets of 15 reps, that kind of thing would probably be enough of a handful of exercises in one workout. If you've got an endurance athlete who actually can do Olympic lifts,
And
they
when
can
you
do
say that, you're specifically talking about just squat, deadlift, and pressing.
Yeah.
But what about the Olympic lifts?
If you're going to do the Olympic lifts, snatches and clean and jerks, there's never any reason to go above 5 repetitions in a set, and 5 reps would be something you would be using extremely light weights, in those kind of movements, because doing the Olympic lifts, they're so multi-jointed and so demanding on the body. After you've done 3, 4, 5 reps in one set, the breakdown in technique is going to start to happen really, really quickly. And so if you decide, well, I'm going to do 3 sets of 10 in the snatch or 3 sets of 10 in the clean and jerk, by rep 5 or 6, that the form is going to be so bad, you're going to be accomplishing nothing and risking injury.
Right. So as a coach teaching endurance athletes this your program, it might look like 3 sets of 5 in the snatch one day, with some overhead pressing as a supplementary exercise and some squats or deadlifts in the program after you've done the Olympic lifts as supplementary strength exercise, and that's the whole program for the day. As you're coaching the athlete through it, if you're coaching an Olympic lifter, you might be focused on increasing the weight constantly and making them stronger. As an endurance coach coaching an endurance athlete through these movements, you might say, okay, for your snatches, you're watching the athlete saying, my focus is going to be on speed and position and seeing, is the athlete getting snappier? Are they having good position? Do they have good range of motion? Are they able to get in these positions? And maybe the focus is, are they increasing the speed over those movements versus getting stronger, like if you were coaching a traditional Olympic lifter through these motions?
Yeah, if you're an endurance athlete, the amount of weight you lift is pretty unimportant. I mean, you're not doing this for any kind of a competitive reason. You're doing it to help your triathlon training. Now, if you've got, for example, let's say you've got an endurance athlete who's doing power cleans, and they're doing sets of 5 in the power clean, and let's say they're doing them with I don't know, let me just pick a weight, like 55 pounds, right? And you watch this athlete do this set of 5 power cleans with 55 pounds, and you can tell just as a coach that the amount of work that they're actually getting from doing that is so minimal. It's almost like them just doing calisthenics, because they're even though you're not trying to like max out in the weights, this athlete is still strong enough to handle more than that. I would say at that point you don't say, well, 55 was easy, let's go to 75. You say 55 was easy, let's go to 60. And you keep those baby increases going. And at some point when it looks like that athlete is really kind of having to exert themselves almost to the point where form is breaking down, you say to yourself, well, that's heavy enough.
Right. And would you do with an endurance athlete, say the program is, you decide for your team, we're going to lift twice a week, Tuesday and Thursday.
Right.
Would you separate it? So would you do a day of snatch and then supplementary exercises, and then the next day is cleans, clean and jerks, power cleans, any of those movements, and then supplementary exercises? Or would you what would that combination look like if you're looking at the programming?
I'd say I'd say you probably don't need to confine yourself to like one specific way of doing it. I think there's almost an unlimited amount of ways you could do it. You could, you could have one day be a mainly upper body day and one day be a mainly lower body day. You could have one day be all Olympic lifts and like Olympic lifting related movements, and the other day be a lot of like, machines and supplementary type exercises. You could have 2 days a week where each day you do some kind of Olympic lift, some kind of fundamental strength movement, squats or presses or whatever, and then, body weight exercises, core, machines, calisthenics, things like that.
Now, if I was going to ask you to summarize, what would be the number one benefit to an endurance athlete doing the Olympic lifts, and what would be the number one pitfall that coaches and athletes need to watch for in incorporating the Olympic lifts? So if we had to summarize this into those 2 points, what would those be?
I would say the number one benefit is, and this is a real general way of saying this, I think most athletes are going to improve if they're just able to increase their just kind of overall athletic skill set. Do I think Do I think getting stronger hamstrings is necessarily going to make you a better runner or a better cyclist? Maybe, but not necessarily. I just think the amount of like overall athletic development that can be gained from strength training is something that could very, very well translate into an athlete's race performance. I would say the number one pitfall that could come from it is risk of injury and risk of putting things into an athlete's program that are actually going to hold back what they're trying to accomplish. Right. They like weight training, they enjoy doing it, they're getting interested in it, they're having a lot of fun with it, they're doing well at it, they're making progress, but before you know it, the swim, bike, and run times are starting to diminish. They're starting to go backwards.
Is there the possibility, though, that there's some injury prevention as well as the times going up from these, like in certain athletes?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Sure, depending on the athlete.
Sure.
I think when we talk about this, all this stuff we're talking about, like which lifts I would program, which sets and reps I would program, which movements we would program for an endurance athlete, you have to remember that all of this is based on whether or not that athlete can effectively do those movements.
Right. So first and foremost, it has to be, the fundamentals have to be established, and that can take a long time, just working with the mobility and the calisthenics and the PVC pipes, and that alone could really be the benefit of incorporating Olympic lifts into an endurance athlete's program. And if the coaches recognize that and stay there, rather than, hey, we're going to use this as actual strength training where we're focused on the amount of weight that the athlete actually moves in a strength session.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, the amount of weight the athlete uses is going to be really unimportant. I don't think you're probably not going to have too many situations where somebody crosses the finish line dead last in a race, but they stand on the finish line and say, yeah, well, I can squat more than everybody out here. It's like, okay,
Right.
Great, congratulations, you're still last.
Right.
So yeah, I think you want to keep in mind what you're trying to accomplish.
Right. All right. Well, hopefully that gives you some food for thought. Obviously, we have a lot more that we could cover with this, and maybe in the future we'll cover some more. If you're interested in a little bit more, you can always reach out to us. Again, you can reach out to me on my site, which is mcc.coach, and you can find Matt on catalystathletics.com, or he has his own author's page on Amazon, so you can go Amazon Matt Foreman and see a lot of books that he's written. Those are more geared towards the strength sports with powerlifting and Olympic lifting, but you might find some good stuff in there. You got hundreds and hundreds of very entertaining articles that I think can benefit any athlete. So hopefully you found this helpful, and if you have some more questions or would like to hear more, let us know, and thanks for listening. Cheers.